A mother in Denver thought it was just another Sunday afternoon, sunlight pouring into her kitchen as her little girl colored happily beside her loyal German shepherd. But when the child came running down the stairs in tears, clutching a red mark on her neck, everything changed. Within minutes, police cars were outside, neighbors whispered, and a family's future hung in the balance. What began as a simple misunderstanding would grow into a storm that nearly tore them apart. What happened next will test your faith in trust, forgiveness, and the quiet miracles God still gives us. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story travels. And if you believe no child should ever live in fear, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear may touch your heart in ways you never expected. The crisp autumn air of Denver carried with it a sense of both melancholy and promise. The city was wrapped in a cool golden light, leaves drifting down the wide tree-lined streets, and the Rockies loomed faintly in the distance like watchful guardians. It was late afternoon, and the sun lingered in the sky, spilling amber across the rooftops of the small residential neighborhood where Laura Miller was trying once again to piece together a new life. Laura Miller, 32 years old, stood at the front porch of her mother's modest two-story home, her hands gripping the railing as she surveyed the street below. Laura was a slender woman of medium height, her long auburn hair pulled into a loose braid that hung over one shoulder. Her hazel eyes often betrayed the storm of emotions she worked so hard to suppress. She had been through a bitter divorce 2 years prior, a rupture that left her cautious, overly protective of her daughter, and constantly questioning her own judgment. Her face, though youthful, carried faint lines at the corners of her mouth from too many sleepless nights. Laura was known for her diligence and reliability at work as an account assistant in a local firm, but the divorce had made her hesitant in social situations, and she often retreated inward when stress pressed too hard. Inside the house, Margaret, her mother, was seated at the dining table with a cup of steaming tea. Margaret was 63, with silver hair pinned into a bun at the nape of her neck, her build a little rounder than in her youth, but carrying an air of authority softened by kindness. She was a woman grounded in faith and routine, someone who had lived in Denver her entire life and believed in the quiet strength of community. The lines on her face were not only signs of age, but also of resilience, for she had raised Laura largely on her own after the death of her husband. Margaret had the steady demeanor of someone who had weathered storms and knew that survival was less about dramatic acts and more about consistency. From the living room came the sound of a child's laughter. 8-year-old Emma sat cross-legged on the carpet, coloring with fierce concentration. Emma was small for her age, with a delicate frame and soft chestnut hair that fell in waves around her face. Her eyes, a striking green, carried a brightness that made her the center of warmth in the household. Though she had been only 6 when her parents divorced, she understood more than adults thought. Emma loved stories, animals, and drawing pictures of the family she still dreamed of. Her mother, her father, her grandmother, and the one companion who never left her side, Max. Max was a 5-year-old German shepherd, his black and tan coat gleaming in the light from the window. He had once been trained for K-9 police work, but had been retired early due to an injury to his back leg that, while healed, made him slightly stiff when the weather turned cold. His amber eyes were sharp yet gentle, his ears erect as if always listening for danger. Muscular and imposing in build, Max could look intimidating to strangers, but to Emma, he was nothing less than a guardian angel. The bond between the girl and the dog was unbreakable, forged during the lonely months after the divorce when Max would curl up at the foot of her bed, absorbing her tears without judgment. He was both protector and playmate, and his instincts to shield Emma were as natural as breathing. That Sunday afternoon, the house smelled of apple pie cooling on the kitchen counter. Margaret was humming softly as she worked on knitting a scarf, the rhythmic clacking of needles adding to the domestic calm. Laura stood near the window, scrolling nervously through emails from work. Her supervisor had once again sent a message questioning her ability to meet deadlines, a reminder of the constant pressure she felt to prove herself. She sighed, rubbed her forehead, and set the phone down. Her gaze drifted to Emma, who was now showing her drawing to Max as if he might comment on it. The dog tilted his head, amber eyes fixed on the paper, then lowered his muzzle to nudge her shoulder. Emma giggled and wrapped her arms around his thick neck. "Grandma," Emma called, bounding into the dining room with the picture in her hands. "Look what I made!" She thrust the page forward with a wide grin. Margaret adjusted her glasses and examined the crayon sketch 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun, and a fourth figure with pointed ears standing proudly beside them. "Is that me in the purple dress?" Margaret asked with amusement. "Yes, that's you, Mommy, me and Max," Emma explained eagerly, pointing at each figure. "I made Daddy small because he doesn't come very much." The words, spoken innocently, pierced Laura's heart. She turned away quickly, pretending to busy herself with the dishes, while Margaret gave her a quiet, knowing look. Later that day, Laura decided to take Emma and Max for a walk around the neighborhood. Denver's streets were alive with the colors of fall, pumpkins already decorating porches, though Halloween was still weeks away. Emma skipped ahead, holding Max's leash tightly, while Laura followed with a wary glance at the clouds gathering in the distance. Margaret had stayed behind to prepare dinner, muttering about needing to check the church's donation drive later that evening. As they walked, they passed neighbors raking leaves. Mrs. Thompson, a chatty woman in her late 50s with a love for gossip, waved them over. "Well, if it isn't little Emma and her knight in shining fur," she said warmly, patting Max's head. "You know, everyone talks about how well-behaved this dog is." "You're lucky to have him." Laura forced a polite smile, nodding, though inside she felt a familiar flicker of anxiety. She never liked being the subject of neighborhood chatter, especially now when whispers about her divorce sometimes lingered like a shadow. Emma, oblivious, leaned down to hug Max. "He's the best dog in the world," she declared with conviction. Max wagged his tail, his protective gaze scanning the street. By the time they returned home, dusk was falling and the sky had taken on shades of deep orange and purple. Margaret had set the table, and the scent of roasted chicken filled the house. Over dinner, the conversation drifted from school projects to Margaret's volunteer work at the church. Emma spoke excitedly about helping collect canned goods for families in need, and Max sat loyally at her side, occasionally rewarded with scraps of meat slipped under the table. After Emma went to bed, Laura lingered in the kitchen with Margaret, the two women sipping tea in silence for a moment before Laura spoke. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough for her. She deserves more than all this." Her voice cracked slightly. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "You're giving her love and safety. That's more than many children have. You can't carry the weight of the world, Laura." Laura nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. Upstairs, Emma was already asleep, one arm draped over Max, who lay stretched across the foot of the bed. The dog's ears twitched at every creak of the house, his eyes half open in vigilance. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering leaves across the yard. The quiet house in Denver seemed for the moment like a sanctuary, though unseen challenges loomed on the horizon. For now, however, the family found comfort in small rituals. Drawings, apple pie, neighborhood walks, and the steady companionship of a loyal German shepherd who seemed to know that his place was at the center of their fragile but hopeful new life. The chill of early October lingered in Denver, painting the mornings with crisp air and skies that seemed endlessly blue. The Miller household stirred awake slowly, with Margaret already in the kitchen, brewing coffee and preparing oatmeal, while Laura packed Emma's lunch for school. Max sat near the doorway, his sharp amber eyes tracking every movement, ears flicking when he heard Emma's footsteps bounding down the stairs. Emma rushed in, her chestnut hair tangled from sleep, still wearing her pink pajamas with faded unicorn prints. She carried her sketchbook under one arm, eager to show her grandmother a new drawing she had made before dawn. Margaret bent down to look, her silver hair catching the sunlight through the window. "Lovely, darling," she said warmly, kissing Emma's forehead. "Another masterpiece for the refrigerator." Max gave a short bark of approval, tail wagging against the floorboards, and Emma beamed, hugging him tightly. By late afternoon, after school and after work, the house was quiet once again. Laura sat at the dining table, sifting through bills, her hazel eyes shadowed with fatigue. Her auburn braid had loosened, strands falling against her face. She rubbed her temples, trying to calculate which expense could be postponed. The sound of the doorbell shattered the fragile silence. 2 short rings, then 1 long. Laura froze. That rhythm was unmistakable. For years, even before their divorce, David Miller had knocked or rung the bell in that same pattern. Slowly, she rose and walked to the front door. When she opened it, David stood there, his tall frame slightly hunched against the evening breeze. He was 35 now, his once athletic build thinner, his short dark brown hair messy, and a rough stubble covered his jaw. His hazel eyes, the same shade as Laura's, were heavy with exhaustion and perhaps regret. David had once been charismatic, known for his ability to light up a room with his smile, but the past 2 years had stripped that away. Since losing his steady job in construction, he had been adrift, taking odd jobs, often unable to keep his promises, and that instability had cost him his marriage. "I need to see Emma," he said, his voice low, tinged with desperation. Laura's body stiffened. "You could have called first," she replied sharply, folding her arms. David's lips curved into a weary half-smile. "Would you have said yes?" Before Laura could respond, a small voice piped up from the hallway. "Is that Daddy?" Emma stood there in her socks, her school backpack sliding off one shoulder. Her eyes lit up, and she sprinted to the door. "Daddy!" David crouched down immediately, arms wide open. "Hey, Ellie Belly," he whispered, his face breaking into a genuine smile for the first time in months. "I've missed you so much." Emma threw herself into his arms, and Max, not far behind, padded closer. The German shepherd's ears perked, his tail still, but his body tense, watching intently as David hugged Emma. The dog's protective instincts stirred, though he made no sound. Laura felt the old conflict tighten in her chest. She remembered too many nights when Emma had sat waiting by the window, her backpack packed for a trip with her father that never came. And yet, the joy on her daughter's face now made her question whether she had the right to deny her this moment. "I just need a few minutes with her," David said quietly, after Emma dashed off to grab her drawing. His tone held both pleading and shame. "I brought her something." Laura hesitated, torn between instinct and her daughter's excitement. 10 minutes, she said finally, her voice firm. "In her room." With the door open, David nodded, relief flickering across his tired features. He followed Emma upstairs, Max shadowing their steps like a silent guardian. In the living room, Margaret emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands with a towel. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "It's fine," Laura said quickly, though her heart beat like a drum. She moved to the window, pretending to straighten the curtains, but really she was watching the minutes tick by in her mind. Upstairs, Emma's laughter floated down faintly, and for a moment, Laura allowed herself to breathe. Maybe this would be harmless. Maybe for once, David was being honest, but the quiet that followed unsettled her. She glanced at the clock. 8 minutes had passed. Margaret noticed her pacing. "Laura, relax," she murmured. "They're fine." Laura forced a smile, but her instincts screamed otherwise. When the bedroom door finally creaked open, she rushed to the foot of the stairs. Emma appeared, clutching something in her small hands, her face flushed with excitement. "Look, Mommy! Daddy brought me a surprise." She opened her palms to reveal a small bundle wrapped in pink tissue paper. Max trotted close behind her, his eyes flicking between Emma and the staircase. Laura exhaled, relief loosening the tension in her shoulders. David followed a moment later, hands stuffed deep in his jacket pockets. "She liked it," he said simply. His eyes sought Laura's, searching for something: approval, forgiveness, perhaps, but she looked away. "Dinner's almost ready," Margaret called, breaking the awkward silence. As they moved into the kitchen, the atmosphere shifted. Emma insisted David stay, and though Laura hesitated, she reluctantly agreed. Over roast chicken and mashed potatoes, Emma chattered about school, proudly showing her latest artwork. David listened intently, nodding, occasionally making a joke that earned a giggle. For a fleeting moment, the table almost felt like it used to: family, laughter, warmth. Yet under the surface, tensions rippled. Laura's phone buzzed twice with messages from her supervisor about a missed deadline, and she excused herself to the hallway. Meanwhile, Margaret asked David about work, her tone polite but cautious. He admitted he was between jobs, trying to figure things out. His hazel eyes dimmed as he said it, but Emma was too busy sneaking bites of chicken to notice. After dinner, Emma ran off to play with Max in the backyard. The German shepherd bounded across the lawn, his muscular frame cutting swift arcs through the grass, while Emma shrieked with joy. David stood at the back door, watching them. For a moment, pride and sadness mingled on his face. "She's grown so much," he murmured. "Yes," Laura replied, her arms crossed. "She has. And she's had to do a lot of it without you." David flinched, his jaw tightening. "I know I've failed, but I'm trying." Please believe that Laura said nothing, staring out at Max as he circled protectively around Emma, never straying far. The dog barked once, loud and sharp, when a car passed by too quickly on the street. Emma grabbed his neck, giggling, oblivious to the tension between her parents inside. When David finally left, Emma clung to his arm, begging for him to stay longer. He kissed her forehead and promised to come back soon. Max stood by the door as he exited, his eyes locked on David until he disappeared down the path. Later that night, Laura tucked Emma into bed. The girl whispered, "Mommy, can Daddy come again tomorrow?" Her green eyes were wide with hope. Laura brushed her hair back gently. "We'll see," she said softly, though doubt weighed heavily on her heart. At the foot of the bed, Max stretched out, his ears twitching at every sound. Downstairs, Margaret placed a hand on Laura's shoulder. "You can't shield her from everything," she said quietly, "but you can prepare her to face the truth." Laura nodded, staring into the shadows. The return of David had reopened wounds she thought had scarred over. What she didn't know was that the gift he had left behind, the small bundle of pink tissue paper on Emma's nightstand, would soon ignite a storm none of them could control. The night after David's visit left the household in a strange silence. Denver's October sky was heavy with clouds, and a cold wind rattled the window panes as Laura prepared Emma's backpack for school the next morning. She could not shake the image of David standing in the doorway, worn and hollow-eyed, promising change. On Emma's nightstand still sat the pink tissue paper bundle, crinkled from her excitement the day before. By Saturday morning, Margaret was already up, her silver hair pinned neatly, making pancakes in the kitchen. She wore her favorite faded blue cardigan, the one she always chose when she felt the family needed comfort. "Breakfast first, then chores," she reminded warmly. Emma bounded in, still in pajamas, clutching Max's leash. "Can Max come with me to the park after pancakes?" she asked hopefully. Laura hesitated, but finally nodded. Max wagged his tail, amber eyes bright, his muscular frame tense with anticipation of fresh air. The park outing was calm. A group of neighborhood children played tag near the swings, and Emma joined in while Max watched, his ears twitching at every shout of laughter. Laura sat on a bench nearby, trying to focus on her phone. She received another message from her supervisor reminding her about delayed reports. Work pressures weighed heavily, and guilt twisted her stomach. Margaret, sitting beside her, noticed her distraction. "Laura," she said gently, "you need to breathe. Worrying will not make him a better father or make your job easier." Later that afternoon, David returned unexpectedly. This time he wore a dark jacket zipped to his chin, his hair combed back, though still untidy. He looked nervous, shifting his weight on the porch. I just want to bring her another gift," he explained quickly, holding a small paper bag. Laura's first instinct was to close the door, but Emma had already heard his voice and came running, eyes alight. "Daddy!" she squealed. Against her better judgment, Laura allowed him inside. Max growled low in his throat as David stepped over the threshold. Laura placed a hand on the dog's neck to calm him, but she noticed how Max's eyes never left David. 10 minutes, she repeated firmly. David nodded, following Emma upstairs. The minutes dragged. Laura tried to fold laundry to distract herself, but her ears strained for any sound. Margaret sat with her crossword puzzle, though her pen barely moved. At last, the sound of Emma's bedroom door creaked open. Footsteps pattered quickly down the stairs. Emma stood at the bottom, trembling, tears streaking her cheeks. Her chestnut hair was tangled, and her small hands clutched the neckline of her shirt. Max bounded down after her, ears flat, barking sharply as if to announce trouble. Laura dropped the laundry basket and rushed forward. "Emma, baby, what's wrong?" The girl's words came out broken, sobbing between hiccups. He said it was irresistible, Mommy." She pulled her hand away, revealing an angry red mark across the soft skin of her neck. Laura's blood froze. "What did he do?" she demanded. Emma only shook her head, burying her face against Max's fur. Margaret gasped, her teacup clattering to the floor. The sound of footsteps on the stairs signaled David's approach. His face registered shock at the sight of Laura crouched protectively over Emma. "What's going on?" She just ran out. Laura's voice shook with fury. "What did you do to her?" "I didn't touch her," David insisted, his hands raised defensively. "We were just talking. She has a mark. She's terrified. And she said you told her something was irresistible." Before he could respond, Laura's trembling fingers dialed 911. David stepped forward, but Max snarled, lips curling to reveal sharp teeth. The German shepherd positioned himself squarely between David and the women, a living barrier. Within minutes, sirens wailed down the street. Two police officers entered, their uniforms crisp, their presence commanding. Officer Rivera, a woman in her late 30s with a calm but firm demeanor, spoke first. She was tall and slim, her black hair tied neatly into a bun, and her dark eyes scanned the room with trained precision. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened here?" Laura, clutching Emma to her chest, explained through choked words. Rivera knelt beside the child, her voice soft but steady. "Sweetheart, we're here to help. Can you show me the mark?" Emma shook her head, gripping Max's collar tightly, refusing to let go. Rivera nodded, respecting her silence, and stood. "We'll need to take her for a medical check." Standard procedure. The second officer, James Holloway, was older, with graying hair and a heavier build. His voice carried the weariness of decades on the force. He approached David, who stood pale and sweating near the kitchen table. "Sir, we need you to stay calm. We'll have some questions for you." David's hazel eyes darted between the officers, his expression both pleading and defiant. "I swear I didn't hurt her." "This is a misunderstanding." The officers separated the family, leading Laura and Emma outside. Neighbors had already gathered, drawn by the flashing lights. Whispers spread quickly. Mrs. Thompson, the gossip-prone neighbor, stood at the edge of her lawn, hand over her mouth. "Poor little Emma," she whispered to another woman. "I knew something was wrong with that man." At the hospital, the pediatrician on duty was Dr. Peterson, a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes behind rectangular glasses. She examined Emma carefully, her touch gentle. "Does it hurt when I press here?" she asked softly. Emma shook her head, though tears still welled in her eyes. Dr. Peterson straightened, speaking quietly to Laura. "It appears to be a friction mark. Could be from jewelry, clothing, or even rough play. It's not conclusive." Laura's heart pounded. "But she said her father called it irresistible." Dr. Peterson sighed, placing a reassuring hand on Laura's arm. "Sometimes children struggle to describe what frightened them. We'll recommend a psychologist to help her process this. For now, she's safe." Meanwhile, back at the house, Officer Rivera and Officer Holloway conducted a preliminary search of Emma's room. They found nothing unusual besides scattered crayons and stuffed animals. Rivera's brow furrowed. Something about the father's demeanor troubled her, yet she had no evidence. "We'll file our report," she told Holloway, "but this family's going to be in the eye of a storm before long." By the time Laura and Emma returned home, the once peaceful street had transformed into a stage for speculation. A local news van idled nearby, its crew already filming. Margaret ushered her daughter and granddaughter inside, glaring at the reporters. Max barked furiously until the cameraman retreated. Inside, Laura collapsed onto the couch, Emma curled tightly in her arms. "Mommy," Emma whispered, her voice small and broken. "Is Daddy going to jail?" Laura kissed her forehead, fighting tears. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise, you are safe." Max lay at their feet, his head resting on Emma's knee. His amber eyes stayed fixed on the front door, as though daring anyone to try and come through it again. Outside, the flashing lights faded, but the damage was done. Whispers would spread, reputations would falter, and the truth, whatever it was, remained hidden beneath layers of fear and misunderstanding. The morning after the hospital visit dawned gray and unsettled, a thin mist hanging over Denver like a veil. The Miller house, which once blended quietly into the row of suburban homes, now carried the weight of curious stares. Neighbors whispered over fences, cars slowed as they passed, and even the mailman lingered too long at the box. Inside, the atmosphere was brittle. Laura barely touched her coffee, her hazel eyes fixed on Emma, who sat at the kitchen table staring blankly at her cereal. Max lay stretched across the floor, his black and tan coat bristling every time footsteps passed outside. The phone rang for the third time that morning. Laura ignored it, recognizing another unfamiliar number. Margaret, dressed in a burgundy sweater, shook her head. "They'll keep calling until they've had their story," she muttered, pouring tea into her chipped porcelain cup. Though her voice carried steady resolve, the faint tremor in her hands betrayed her unease. Then, just before noon, the doorbell rang. This time it wasn't reporters or officers, but a figure Laura had not expected, Susan Miller, David's younger sister. Susan was 31, tall and willowy, with straight blonde hair that fell neatly to her shoulders. Her blue eyes were sharp but not unkind, and she carried herself with a blend of determination and weariness. Life had not been easy for her either. Years of working as a nurse had left her practical, outspoken, and unafraid of confrontation. Laura opened the door cautiously. "Susan?" "I'm not here to argue," Susan said quickly, her voice low. "I just want to talk." She held up her hands, palms out as though stepping onto contested ground. Laura hesitated but allowed her inside. Margaret eyed her warily from the kitchen, and Max rose immediately, ears pricked, tail stiff. Emma peeked around the corner, her green eyes uncertain, clutching Max's collar. Susan knelt slightly to Emma's height, her expression softening. "Hi, sweetheart. I brought you something." She produced a small bag and pulled out a thin book of fairy tales. "Remember you told me you liked stories with princesses and dogs?" This one has both. Emma's face brightened briefly, though she said nothing. She pressed her cheek against Max's head, letting the German shepherd serve as her barrier. Once Emma retreated upstairs, Susan joined Laura and Margaret at the dining table. "Look," she began, brushing her hair back, "I know my brother. He's irresponsible, careless, and he's made a mess of his life, but hurting Emma? That doesn't fit. We need to figure out what really happened." Laura bristled. "She came down crying, Susan. She had a mark on her neck. What was I supposed to think?" "I'm not saying don't protect her," Susan replied firmly. "I'm saying maybe there's more to it." "Did David give her something? He told me earlier he had a gift for her." Laura froze, remembering the crumpled tissue paper Emma had clutched. She had something wrapped in pink paper. "I never asked to see what it was." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Then we should find it." Together, the three women climbed the stairs. Max padded behind, nails clicking softly against the hardwood. Emma's room was bright, pastel walls lined with stuffed animals and drawings taped in crooked rows. Laura crouched near the bed, peering underneath. She pulled out a wrinkled piece of tissue paper patterned with silver stars. "This is it," she whispered. Susan took it, examining the folds. "He always used paper like this for birthdays," she said softly. "But where's the gift?" Margaret, bending with more effort, reached behind the dresser. Her hand emerged holding a few small plastic beads, pink, blue, and green, along with a broken plastic clasp. "This looks like it belonged to a necklace," she murmured. Laura's stomach tightened. She remembered Emma's frightened words. Irresistible. The mark on her neck. The tears. Could it have been this? Max sniffed at the beads, then sat firmly in front of Emma's dresser, as though guarding the evidence. His amber eyes flicked to Laura, waiting. Before they could process further, a knock interrupted them. It wasn't the doorbell this time, but a firm rap on the back door. Laura descended quickly, Max bounding at her heels. Standing outside was Dr. Karen Bennett, the child psychologist recommended by the hospital. Dr. Bennett was in her early 50s, her chestnut hair cut into a practical bob, glasses perched low on her nose. She had a calm, measured presence, the kind of woman who had spent decades listening without judgment. "Thank you for agreeing to a home session," Dr. Bennett said as Laura let her in. "Given the media attention, I thought it would be easier for Emma." Laura led her into the living room where Emma sat curled on the sofa, sketchbook in hand. Max positioned himself beside her, a silent sentinel. Dr. Bennett smiled warmly. "Hi, Emma. I'm Karen. May I sit with you?" Emma eyed her warily but nodded. Over the next half hour, Dr. Bennett spoke gently, asking questions not directly but through games and drawings. Emma answered sparingly, sometimes whispering to Max instead of the psychologist. But one phrase kept slipping through, irresistible. She murmured it while shading a drawing, hummed it softly while tracing Max's paw on paper. Dr. Bennett later pulled Laura aside. "She's holding something back, but she repeats that word as if it holds the key. I'd like to see her again, maybe with play therapy." She adjusted her glasses. "Also, did she have any jewelry or accessories recently? Something she could have worn that day?" Laura's breath caught. She exchanged a glance with Margaret, who quietly opened her palm to show the plastic beads they had just found. Dr. Bennett's brows lifted, but she said nothing further, only noted it down in her folder. After she left, Susan remained seated at the table, her expression conflicted. "If that necklace caused the mark," she began. It doesn't change that Emma was terrified, Laura cut in, and she connected that fear to David. Margaret spoke firmly. What matters is understanding what she truly experienced, not what we fear she did. The weight of those words hung in the room. Outside, the news van still idled across the street, a camera pointed at the house. Laura drew the curtains, her chest tightening. That night, after Emma was tucked in and Max settled at her feet, Laura sat alone in the kitchen. She spread the beads across the table, the clasp broken, the tissue paper smoothed flat. Susan sat opposite her, sipping tea, her blonde hair falling into her face as she leaned forward. "My brother's life is falling apart," she said quietly. "He's sleeping on friends' couches. He's lost everything. If this is a misunderstanding, it will destroy him." Laura pressed her palms against her eyes. "And if it isn't?" Neither had an answer. But upstairs, Emma stirred in her sleep, whispering again that haunting word. Irresistible. Max shifted beside her, pressing closer as though he understood that the storm had not yet passed. The day of the emergency hearing arrived beneath a sky heavy with low clouds, as though Denver itself anticipated a storm not of weather, but of judgment. Laura stood outside the courthouse, clutching Emma's small hand. Her daughter was dressed in a soft lavender sweater and jeans, her blonde brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail by Margaret earlier that morning. Emma's eyes, normally bright with curiosity, carried a guarded look, her lips pressed together as though silence had become her shield. Beside them, Max sat obediently, his amber eyes alert, his coat gleaming despite the drizzle. Several passers-by stopped to stare, whispering at the sight of the German shepherd accompanying them into a courthouse. Inside, the hallway buzzed with tension. Reporters milled near the entrance, their cameras flashing when Laura entered. A bailiff quickly intervened, reminding them of restrictions. Laura kept her eyes forward, her pulse quickening. Margaret, wearing a navy coat that lent her an air of calm authority, squeezed her daughter's arm. "Remember, Laura," she said softly, "truth doesn't need shouting. It stands on its own." Waiting near the courtroom door was Officer Rivera, a woman in her late 30s with sharp brown eyes and a posture that conveyed both discipline and compassion. She had been assigned to Emma's case from the beginning. Dressed in her Navy police uniform, her black hair tied neatly in a bun, Rivera exuded the kind of calm that steadied anxious parents. She leaned toward Laura. "We'll go through standard procedure today. No matter what's said inside, remember, Emma's welfare is at the center." Then David arrived. His appearance shocked Laura. He had always been a tall man with an athletic build, but now his face was hollowed, cheeks drawn, hair unkempt. He wore a wrinkled gray suit borrowed, perhaps, from a friend. At his side walked Elaine Harper, his attorney. Elaine was in her mid-40s, petite but fierce, her dark tailored suit fitting like armor. Her sharp cheekbones, sleek black hair, and penetrating gray eyes made her look like someone who thrived under pressure. She carried a leather briefcase and walked as if she owned the hallway. David's gaze flicked briefly to Laura, then down to Emma, who half hid behind Max. His lips parted as though he wanted to say something, but Elaine gently touched his arm and shook her head. When the courtroom doors opened, everyone filed inside. The space smelled faintly of old wood and paper, the walls lined with shelves of legal tomes. At the bench sat Judge Eleanor Whitmore, a woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair pulled back into a bun. Her square glasses perched low on her nose, giving her the look of someone who had seen countless family disputes and carried little patience for theatrics. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, and the room settled into uneasy silence. Laura sat with Margaret and Susan behind her, their presence like twin anchors of support. Emma was excused from direct testimony, but waited in a quiet room nearby with Max under the supervision of a court aide. Laura's heart ached as she watched her daughter leave, the German shepherd pressing close as if aware of his vital role. Elaine Harper rose first. "Your Honor, the accusations against my client are severe, but they are built entirely on assumption. There is no evidence of misconduct. The mark on the child's neck is consistent with ordinary friction. A broken piece of toy jewelry was found in her room, which could easily explain it." Her voice was crisp, unwavering, each word measured like a blade. Laura's attorney, Michael Donnelly, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and kind gray eyes, stood in rebuttal. Unlike Elaine, he carried a gentler energy. His brown tweed suit looked slightly dated, but his sincerity radiated. "Your Honor, Mrs. Miller acted in the heat of maternal instinct." She found her daughter sobbing, clutching her neck, repeating a disturbing phrase. Her decision to call 911 was not out of malice, but protection. We must weigh that protective impulse, for if she had ignored it and something had been wrong, the consequences would have been dire. Judge Whitmore listened silently, hands steepled, her lined face unreadable. Then she leaned forward. "Bring in the child psychologist." Dr. Karen Bennett entered, composed as ever. She adjusted her glasses before speaking. "I have met with Emma twice. She exhibits anxiety and avoidance behaviors typical of children caught between parents. She repeats the word irresistible, which suggests a fixation. However, she has not disclosed inappropriate behavior. In my professional opinion, the mark is more likely from a physical object, not intentional harm. Still, Emma's fear was real, and fear can leave as much of a mark as any bruise." Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Laura felt her stomach twist. She had wanted clarity, but Dr. Bennett's balanced words only deepened the uncertainty. Then came an unexpected witness. Officer Rivera requested to speak. Standing tall in her uniform, she addressed the court. "During my investigation, I noted the presence of tissue paper and plastic beads in the child's room. These are consistent with a broken necklace. The police lab confirmed the clasp matches marks on the child's neck. No evidence of force or abuse was detected." Her gaze softened slightly as it flicked toward Laura. "In my view, this was an accident magnified by fear." Laura's throat tightened. She glanced at Margaret, whose face bore both relief and sorrow. Susan leaned closer, whispering, "This could save him." Elaine Harper seized the momentum. "Your Honor, with no evidence of abuse and clear indication of an accident, we request dismissal of restrictions against my client." But Michael Donnelly interjected, "Dismissal is premature. The child's psychological state must also be considered. While physical harm may not be proven, emotional distress persists. I urge continued supervised visitation until further therapy clarifies Emma's feelings." The judge deliberated, her fingers tapping the bench. Finally, she spoke. "Mr. Miller, this court does not find conclusive evidence of misconduct. However, given the child's distress, I order supervised visitation to continue for 3 months, after which we will review progress." The gavel struck. The decision was made. David exhaled, shoulders slumping. Relief flickered across his face, though it was shadowed by exhaustion. Laura sat frozen, torn between relief and lingering doubt. She had not lost, nor had she won. The truth remained complicated. Afterward, in the courthouse corridor, Laura encountered Elaine Harper. Surprisingly, the formidable lawyer softened her tone. "Mrs. Miller, fear can make us see shadows where there are none. My client bears his flaws, but he loves his daughter. For her sake, find a way to work with him." Then she strode away, heels clicking like punctuation. As Laura waited for Emma and Max to rejoin her, she noticed another figure approaching, Dr. Renee Miles, a child therapist recommended by Dr. Bennett. Dr. Miles was in her 40s with curly auburn hair and warm brown skin. She carried a tote filled with small toys and books. "Mrs. Miller," she said kindly, "I'll be working with Emma starting tomorrow. My sessions involve play therapy. Often children show us through dolls or drawings what words cannot." Laura nodded, weary but grateful. "Anything that helps her." That evening, back home, the Miller household was quieter. Emma curled on the couch beside Max, reading the fairy tale book Susan had brought. Laura watched her daughter trace the illustrations with her finger, whispering occasionally to the dog. Margaret sat knitting, her steady rhythm a balm against the day's chaos. Laura stepped outside onto the porch. The drizzle had stopped, leaving the air cool and damp. The street was empty of reporters now, the circus moving on to fresher scandals. She closed her eyes, breathing in the damp night air. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the faint stirrings of hope that maybe, with time and patience, they could rebuild what fear had nearly destroyed. Sometimes the greatest storms in life are not the ones that rage outside, but the ones that rise inside our own hearts. Laura's fear, Emma's silence, David's brokenness, all of it seemed like a mountain too high to climb. Yet in the end, truth came quietly, through the innocent hands of a child and a simple necklace of beads. What looked like tragedy was, in fact, a reminder that God still works miracles in the smallest of ways. The story teaches us this: when we are lost in doubt, when fear blinds us, we must remember to trust that light will break through. Healing may not come quickly, but it does come, often through love, forgiveness, and the steadfast faith that God is watching over every family. Just as Emma found safety and her parents found a way back to peace, so too can we discover that no mistake, no misunderstanding is beyond redemption when we put our hope in the Lord. So tonight, as you reflect on this story, take a moment to think of the blessings in your own life. Think of the people you may need to forgive, the fears you need to lay down, and the faith you may need to pick up again. If you believe that God still brings light after the storm, share this story with someone who needs hope today. Write your thoughts in the comments, and if you feel moved, type Amen as a prayer for every child, every parent, and every broken heart seeking healing. And remember, every time you subscribe, comment, or share, you are helping spread not just stories, but faith, love, and the reminder that we are never alone. May God bless you, may He bless your family, and may He protect every child with His unfailing love.